Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Bike Shed, a weekly podcast from your friends at thoughtbot about developing great software. I'm Joël Quenneville.
And I'm Sally Hall.
And I'm Aji Slater.
And together we're here to share a bit of what we've learned along the way.
And today is the finale of our first season of The Bike Shed.
Woo!
Really exciting. It feels like just yesterday when we got to introduce both you, Sally, and Aji on the show as new co-hosts.
Yeah, time flies when you're talking about software.
And part of what we were doing was not just introducing new co-hosts, but trying to bring in a slightly different format, a little more structured sort of tempo to the show. And so we moved from a just infinite stream of episodes to a little bit more of a season base, with the idea being that we'll have an intro to the season that's all three of us. We have a finale, which is what we're doing right now, all three of us. And then we rotate co-hosts during the season. We have a mid-season guest. And maybe as we evolve this format, we might have some others or regular occurrences. But this is our first finale.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
One of the things that we wanted to do with this finale is I find that we often during the show will talk about an interesting thing. Maybe someone's trying a new skill or someone's trying out a new piece of software, and we'll be like, oh, we should check in with you in 6 months to see if you're still using this software, or whether this skill turned out to be helpful. And we don't always do that. And so part of what we can do with this episode is have a sort of regular check-in time to be like, hey, what was the thing that you were doing that we wanted to see how that was going? Sally, I know one thing, I think in a very early episode of the season that we said we wanted to check in on was that you were on a React and TypeScript project.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I've been on a project. It's a Rails backend, so I still get to do some Rails, but what feels like the most amount of work that I'm doing, and probably because it's the least familiar for me, is the React and TypeScript that I'm doing, which at first I was very grumpy about.
Yeah, I remember some mixed feelings.
Yeah, famously not a huge fan of JavaScript. And front-end fiddliness, which is not to... I never want to sound dismissive of that work because it's very difficult and important work, and I'm just not good at it and don't like it. So
That's valid. That's valid.
Yeah, but I've been unable to avoid it for the past many months, and I'm in some ways being won over, and in some ways so ready to not have to do it every day anymore. I'd say the thing that I find most frustrating and difficult to adjust to is writing tests for JavaScript or for React components. I try as much as I can to sort of like, I'm going to write a Rails system test and it will do all of these things. But we have some like CI quality checks that include coverage metrics. And one of them doesn't, basically system tests don't count as coverage for front-end components. Mm-hmm. So I've been forced to test those directly more than I would like to, which has been, I just don't like it. I just don't like it. You have to mock so many things, and it feels like it sort of pushes you towards testing things more in isolation than I would generally prefer to for something that interacts with so many different things. If that makes sense? I feel like the whole idea of React is like all of these things influencing each other. And I find it really difficult to isolate what do I actually want to test in this piece, and really hard to do something that feels more like an integration test. And I've definitely found bugs that I caused that I would have caught better had I been writing better integration tests, because it's like, I'm interacting with this thing and I see that the output is what I expect. And then I mock input that looks like that for this other thing, and it behaves the way I expect. But then it turns out that that's actually not the shape of the inputs and the outputs, and the tests pass and the code doesn't work. So I still don't like that.
I know some projects will sort of pull out a lot of the logic from the components and create almost like a util style library. And then they'll unit test those with something like Jest so that you can do sort of more deterministic classical unit tests and not have quite as much that's tied into the React component JSX stuff, and then the component is mostly just focused on the UI parts of things. Is that something that your project is doing?
We do some of that. We've got some really, really complicated forms that contain other forms that, as you choose things, various things get enabled or disabled or reset to other stuff, which is what I've been working on at least this past couple of weeks, which feels like you really just can't avoid just doing it. I think there's also another thing that feels frustrating is that I feel like when I'm working in a entirely Rails application, I feel like I've developed a good sense of like when to write what kind of test.
Right.
And how to test things and how to make sure that I'm truly testing what I think I'm testing and not just writing a thing that looks green but doesn't actually validate anything.
Right.
That's a real skill.
Yeah. And I'm like really early in developing those skills for React or even JavaScript testing in general. So I haven't developed really the instincts of like, oh, this isn't a component that should be extracted, or this is a function that should be extracted and put into the utils, and then I can test it this way. My files are all a lot bigger than I'm comfortable with, to be honest. So yeah, I guess those things are less complaints about React or JavaScript and more complaints about working in a stack that I'm less familiar with. And just, I feel like I've gotten really used to feeling really comfortable in Rails. And that like it's rare that I struggle to figure out how to write a test in Rails anymore, or RSpec, or even mini-test, which I've used a little bit more recently. And so it's just a new uncomfortable feeling to be like confused and bad at it. But I think I've started to accept like it's okay to be confused and bad at this. Yeah, I'm just having to get comfortable with being less good at something than I'm used to. And that's a life skill that I've been working on my whole life and probably will continue working on my whole life. And I can't blame React for it. I can blame React for other things, though.
That's something I feel like we talk about our job being continuous learning all the time, but it's rare that we are so dramatically set back as when we're going into a completely different paradigm or a different language. And so we might have that skill built up. It's not to the level that when we get thrown a completely new challenge, it still doesn't feel kind of fish out of water. So yeah. Heard.
Yeah. So, but I'm less angry at it. And I don't think I would be as reluctant as I used to be to join a new project that is heavy React because I've had this experience.
That's awesome.
So there's a pretty bow to put on that.
If you had to sort of pull one aspect of developing in React and TypeScript that you would say is maybe like impressed you or that you thought was sort of a neat thing that this community and this technology does, what would you say is your number one?
I've been frustrated with how different the form, like creating a form and handling form interactions is compared to just like the form helpers I'm used to in Rails. But I would say that we've been using React hook form hook. Oof. Clearly I'm an expert on this now. I feel like it's got some just like really, really helpful and clean ways to interact with the form, to check the state of a form, and to like have a high level understanding of what is happening in the form. That was surprisingly easy to get started with and easy to use and understand, which I kind of expected to be a bigger mess because I like the Rails form magic. But there's some React form magic too, and it's pretty magical. I'd say the one thing that I'm still frustrated by is how often there are like 1,000 different ways to do something, or how often things re-render. And if I'm working in Rails and I see a network call or a thing that's being like re-rendered 5 or 6 times, I panic. Like that is not supposed to happen. Something is going very wrong. But like in some way, some amount of that is a natural part of the like React lifecycle, but it still makes me feel very panicky. Like, why is it calling that again?
Yep.
I think probably some of that is still happening more than it should. Like I don't think it's ideal for something to hit an API 4 times when one would do.
Just gratuitous network calls.
Yes, just, we've got the network. Let's use it.
Don't worry, it's in the background.
Yeah, it's fine. You won't see it. So that's something that I feel like there's probably good approaches or mental models for that I haven't quite latched onto yet.
I think beyond just the sort of component structure and the state management sort of piece, that understanding of the life cycle and the rendering and when things fire and when they don't, and when is it okay to re-render a bunch of times because it's actually really fast, and when do you want to really dig into the performance of that, that's kind of like the next level of learning React. And so now that you're more comfortable, you're at that level, you're at that plane. That's your next kind of conceptual challenge, and it's fun to see because I like React.
We've moved beyond the "oh, thank God it works, I'm done."
Yes,
it works. How do I make it work better?
Make it. What is it? It's make it work, make it fast. No, wait. Make it work, make it good, make it fast.
I think so. Yeah, I'm moving from just make it work to make it work and make it good. Someday we will also make it fast.
Maybe that'll be a topic to check in on for the finale for season 2.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about yourself, Joelle? What have you been thinking about over the course of this season?
There's a few things that I've been thinking about. Similar to Sally, I've been working on a Rails backend React TypeScript front-end application, and I've been really digging into the question of what is the value that types give to us. And I've heard a variety of answers from a lot of different people, particularly to the question, do types in TypeScript particularly help us to prevent bugs? And I've had some sort of TypeScript main language people tell me, not really. It's mostly just to enable tooling. It makes my VS Code better, but it doesn't really help that much with bugs. I've talked to people who are like, type bugs aren't really a thing. Like, they're not very high on the list of things that I encounter. And so, yeah, other aspects of a type system might be helpful, but the preventing bugs is not what they're most excited about. And I think I disagree.
Ooh.
I think if you're using it wrong, which I do, it doesn't. I wouldn't say I use it completely wrong, but it's so easy and so tempting when a type isn't right to just sort of tweak it a little bit and be like, well, this attribute is now optional. Or it could be a string or a number or null. Those are all fine. When that's not actually true about the data that you're representing, but it's just, it can make your VS Code type checker stop yelling at you. So
I think, Sally, you've stumbled into something that's really deeply true about the way that people engage with types. And that is sort of your mental model of what the type system is doing and the value that you get out of it are going to be tied together. So I've got this sort of fuzzy concept of a journey where you're, as you sort of level up your sense of what the type system is, you get more and more value out of it. Potentially also having to put more work into it, but because you see that value, it becomes symbiotic. And so that sort of entry level in this journey is what you were describing. The type system is a taskmaster to be appeased. It is the thing that yells at you and prevents you from pushing up your code. It's the CI that breaks, and you just need to do whatever you need to do to get it to shut up.
Yeah.
And theoretically there's some value, and I guess your VS Code's a little bit better. You get autocomplete, but really you just want it to get out of your way. And then building on that, I'm sort of sketching out. This is not entirely done, but I've got a few sort of phases in a journey where you're getting more and more value out of it. And then at the end, you end up in a situation where the type checker is not this taskmaster to be appeased. Instead, it is a pair programmer, a system to which you use types as a language. This is how you talk to your type system. And the type system speaks back to you in its output when it checks your your code. And now it's a conversation between you and the type system about sort of an evolving design and evolving implementation. And the type checker is an assistant, and it helps you guide that journey. People sometimes talk about this as type-driven development. A lot of the guides or the things that we like about test-driven development, TDD, where it can help guide our design, is also true for types.
I have heard this concept. I think we've talked about this journey before, and I'm definitely on board and have had the experience of going through this journey. But I'm failing to see where in that journey you think this helps prevent bugs, because that doesn't seem like the value that you're deriving from a type system.
You know what? That's funny that you mentioned that, right? That is very true. And that's a little bit like how we talk about TDD. There's part of us when we're advocating for tests, it's like, oh, but it's good at preventing regressions and it'll catch bugs and things like that. But then we're also like, but that's not the real value of tests. The real value is the design pressure and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I will say, I think that even at that sort of base level of your journey, it catches some bugs. So I'm doing this like exploration into types, and I'm looking at it through a few different lenses. So one is that sort of journey of like how you use types, and how your sort of conception of what the type system is feels along that journey. A second axis is sort of collecting a few different mental models of like, what is a type system? And then a third one is building a sort of taxonomy of different bug types and how they can or cannot get caught by a type system. At its core, a type system is really, and I'm going to throw a mental model at you here, a system for consistency. Right? It builds out your sort of function graph and just wants to make sure that all the inputs and outputs snap together. And if they don't snap, then effectively there's a discontinuity in your function graph, and it's going to yell at you. It's going to say, "Hey, you got to fix this because there's a break here." And at its really basic level, it'll catch a lot of things that we tend to have to test in Ruby for things like, oh, make sure that we call, like when we're doing a lot of mocking for like very strictly isolated unit tests. So make sure that we call this collaborator with parameters in this way or something like that. Those you just get for free with a type system.
Right.
Yeah, that is helpful for catching bugs, is knowing that I feel like I'm still just at that level where it's like the only way that a type system is going to catch a bug for me is making sure that the inputs and outputs are the correct types. If I don't, just squish them around to be what I want them to be.
I feel like there's another thing to maybe parse apart here is when you're saying it will help you prevent bugs, are you thinking about bugs more in your development flow? Is it helping you pick up on things or not have to think about those and sort of smoothing things out? Or are you thinking about bugs in production?
I'm thinking about bugs in production.
Okay.
And at the base level, what you want to prevent is just a straight up crash. Which is what you would get if you're having some like low level mistakes, like calling a function with the wrong arguments. Now, in theory, there are other ways to catch these things as well: manual testing, integration testing. Maybe Sally with a level of sort of unit testing of your components that you're doing, it would catch that as well. But a type system is another way of catching these. What gets really interesting, though, is that for something that's like this basic of a task that does just making sure that all your pieces snap together, it turns out, and I have a note in my note-taking system, like just titled this, many invariants or truths about your program can be turned into consistency problems. So there are things you're like, oh, I wish there was an automated way to check this on my program. And it turns out that with a tiny bit of work, you can tweak the types such that they can express that. And now the type system, which is still just checking consistency, is able to check for that particular thing you're looking for. So a lot of problems can be converted into consistency problems. And that really widens the class of things that a type checker can look for in terms of behavior and bugs of the code you're writing.
I like that framing. I think that's maybe a useful question to continue posing to yourself. Like, can I turn this into a consistency problem that can push what you're thinking of into these automated checking systems, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to add that to my repertoire.
So yeah, I've got to say almost like probably a dozen notes in my system, all on different aspects of this. Type taxonomy or bug taxonomies, mental models for type systems, ways you can convert different types of problems into type errors. I think one of the probably most useful ones, because I think that I hear a lot from people, it's like, well, but type errors are not a thing I commonly write anyway. Like using a string instead of a number, how often do I really do that? And a lot of Rubyists will say that when we talk about are types valuable in Ruby. Because Ruby does have technically a type error exception that can be thrown, and you pretty much never see that show up. My counter to that, though, would be if you're writing Ruby and you've ever run into a no method error, and don't lie, you have done that probably this week, probably today, that's a type error.
Yeah,
it absolutely is.
We don't call it a type error, but it is a type error. And TypeScript can catch that sort of thing out of the box if you turn on all the settings. Because it's meant to be a gradual type system, there's a lot of things it doesn't check by default. So you've got to turn on a bunch of settings. But null safety is one of the almost free things that you get from a type system that is just so amazing. I love not running into no method errors in production.
Yeah, I have found the null safety thing really helpful to be trying to do something with a piece of information and having TypeScript be this might be null. Careful.
Mm-hmm.
Or the frustration of no, I promise you will never be null. Don't force me to check it here.
Yeah.
But do you really know? You should probably handle that.
Yeah.
Oh, types. One of the eternal holy wars of developers.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that I want types in Ruby, but I do appreciate them when working in TypeScript. I think they have more value than we realize, and we can get even more value if we understand them more deeply and are willing to put just a little bit more work into how we use our types. That's my thesis.
Yeah. I feel like to some degree using active model or active record objects as a big piece of what I'm doing in Rails gives you a little bit of type checking for free.
Yes.
You can't save an attribute on a model that's not defined. It's going to be I don't know what that is. And you can do validations that require things to be in a certain type.
I would say that's part of the selling point for something like a value object versus a hash for things, because a hash could have any keys we don't really know, and any key could return nil. But you have a more sort of defined object, and if you have that object, it probably if it responds to one of the methods, it probably responds to all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a certain amount of you might call that safety by construction. And some of what you can do with types is specifically that, is saying, hey, if I can guarantee that data is in this shape, then all of a sudden all these other things are true.
Yeah.
But you can do that less formally just by having your data structures take inputs in a certain way, and then that can guarantee a certain amount of consistency for the group as a whole. I will pitch this article that I pitch probably 3 or 4 times a year. Hillel Wayne's constructive versus predicative data. It's an article about ways of enforcing certain truths about or consistency about a piece of data. And he'll talk about a way that's sort of safe by construction based on the design of your data structure versus ways that are safe by validation. You've had to run a certain check on that. And that shows up in all sorts of places. But one place where, as Rails developers, I think we often have to think about is in our database schemas. There are certain things where we can say, hey, if I design my schema in a certain way, my Postgres table has these columns, then I sort of get for free a guarantee that my data is going to be valid because it has to just to be able to be written.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some properties that are really hard to do constructively, and so we have to use a database trigger, or we have to use a Rails validation or something like that to ensure that the data stays in the right shape. And so they're both sort of 2 classes strategies. being familiar with the differences is helpful across a variety of software things. But I would even go so far as to say that sort of mindset, the constructive versus predicative, roughly lines up with the idea of enforcing your invariants via types versus checking them via tests.
I'm going to have to think about that for a little while, but it sounds really good.
I like to think of that as they don't necessarily work in opposition to each other. They exist in the same space, and they are different tools and different uses where sometimes you need one, sometimes you need the other. And rather than choosing a side and saying that this one is better, that, those kind of arguments are out there. I think being familiar with the use cases for both, the way that you can frame things to make the work easier for yourself and for future collaborators, being aware of all the ins and outs of those two different concepts is incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And I would say that what we have here is effectively sort of a Venn diagram of solutions in problem spaces, where you sort of have one circle for your more constructive approach, one circle for your sort of more predicative approach, but there is an overlap of types of problems that can be solved both ways. And oftentimes to me, that's where people get a little bit more friction, because you may have a preference to solving problems one way versus another. Maybe because you tend to mostly spend your time with problem sets that are best solved with one approach. So that's where you're sort of comfortable. That's where you're an expert at the solutions. And so when you hit solutions or problems that can be solved either way, you tend to reach for one more than the other.
Yeah, I feel like that encapsulates a lot of my TypeScript journey, and my just React journey. I've got the one way that I try to solve the problems. It's not always the right one, but it's the one I reach for.
So constructive versus predicative data, great article. I recommend reading it. We'll link it in the show notes. That's not a new thing for me. I keep recommending it on the show a lot. But I'm curious for the two of you, have either of you maybe read or watched anything over this past season that you're like, that was a good read or a good watch, and I would love to recommend that to our listeners?
I watched this really great keynote of keynotes. I don't know if y'all have heard about it. This cool person named Aji did it.
Aw, shucks. I was trying really hard to bite my tongue and not recommend a keynote that I recently watched for writing that talk.
Go for it.
Well, it wasn't something that I've watched over our season of time anyway. But I was posed the question, are there, I think by you, Joel, in Slack, are there any of those keynotes that I've recommended more than others? Because that's basically become my personality, is saying, there was a RailsConf keynote about this. And that made me think that there hasn't been one that really stands out. I really have found that there's been such a breadth of topics and different situations in which they're applicable that there's not one that keeps floating to the top, because every sort of context that you're having a conversation in can come from a very different starting place. The one I will say that breaks that mold and does find more uses simply because of the breadth of topics that the talk itself goes into is from Eileen Ushitel. And I think it's going to be RailsConf 21. I'll put it in the show notes for sure. But she talks mostly about advocating for open source and how to do that at your company, and a lot of different really useful strategies towards talking to management and people who might not hold the same values that the technical departments are holding, and how to communicate the value of open source. And so that one, if there is an empty space in a conversation, I'll bring up that keynote because I think it is so important and could be so impactful if more people took a look.
I remember there being a lot of buzz around that keynote when Eileen first gave it. A lot of people walked out of there feeling really inspired.
Absolutely. I can definitely see that. And I think I remember that from watching it the first time.
Well, I think we're getting a little bit close to when we need to wrap up. But first, I want to maybe do a little mini retro on our season of podcasting and what the bike shed has been like. And maybe we could just each do a quick what went well and what we can want to try, what we could do differently next season. What do you think?
I love that. Live retro on the air.
Yeah. I guess it's only fair for me to start. I've really liked this rotating format. Like, it's so fun to have all three of us on like it is right now, but it's also been really interesting to just have the different kinds of conversations we have in our, three different pairs. And it's also fun to not have the pressure to record every week. So I've really been enjoying that. I think something that I would like to maybe try going forward, we've talked about video, we've recorded some video, but we haven't gotten to the point where this is consistently both video and audio podcast. And I think it'd be fun to give that a try and to start showing our beautiful faces to the world.
Yeah, so for the entire season, we've been recording video. That video exists in a vault somewhere. And one of these days, maybe we'll release the back episodes so everyone can see. Oh, this is what season 1 looked like when they were all figuring it out. But yeah, we're still figuring out some of the production
pretty
things.
Expressive faces, so yeah. What about you, Aji?
Yeah, I think to kind of key off of that, it has, from a personal perspective, been really fantastic that while my personal life has been kind of upended by this international move, I've been able to lean on the two of you to take a little bit more of the work on for this season. And so I'm really grateful for you to be able to do that and for being willing to do that. And I look forward to the times when I can pay that forward and take on some of the load for either of you when it's necessary. But yeah, it's been incredibly helpful because even though I thought this move was going to take an incredible amount of time, it turns out it takes more. But I'm landed, I'm settled, and I am looking forward to getting really into this rotation the way that we have sort of planned it out to be in season 2.
Are there some ways that you're maybe looking to improve the show in season 2?
Well, being on it more, I think, would
more Aji.
Yeah, would be number one. I do like the idea of video. I would like to see where we can go with that when we've settled into it and how we can use that as another aspect without losing something for the people that are audio only listeners. So that's kind of an exciting new frontier.
What about you, Joël?
I'm really excited to have both of you on as co-hosts. I think you both bring a lot of energy to the show, a lot of great ideas, great conversation topics. This has been really fantastic, I think, to sort of grow the cast in that way. I'm really appreciating the sustainability of this current format. I think I was struggling to get the show out sort of consistently, especially when I was, for about 6 months, hosting the show solo. So sourcing a guest every week, getting topics, doing some of the logistical work, and then recording every week was something I was struggling to stay on top of. So this feels much more sustainable because now we're working at it as a team. And my sort of pressure around the show has gone down dramatically, which I think helps me probably to be a better, more interesting person on air.
What are you looking forward to doing more of or differently next season?
So I love the concept of this recap episode. And I would love to sort of dig into and expand it a little bit. One thing that we didn't do this season is take down notes. of things that we wanted to look back on in the recap episode. So we've had to sort of source them from memory. Oh yeah, what did we say we should check back in on during the season? I'd love to take more meticulous notes and then have 5, 6, 7 things that we check back in on and be like, oh yeah, so you said you were using this app, or you wanted to talk about this thing. And like we did some really big things this time. I'd love to dig into some of the more nitty-gritty things as well for future recaps.
Yeah, we should probably all re-listen to last week's note-taking episode to prepare for that.
I'm gonna agree with that, and also kind of add on that I think there's plenty of reason why this may have occurred. That it's our first season doing this, and we're still feeling it out. But I think just a little more to peel back the curtain a little bit. A little more rigor around how we're sort of approaching it. We were a little maybe catch as catch can some weeks, and I think if we put a little bit more of a system, impose that on ourselves, we could set ourselves up for success as far as being ahead a couple of episodes in recording, that sort of thing, and really leverage the strength of the rotating host paradigm that we sort of set out the intention with. That I think behind the scenes we didn't really fully actualize.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for season 2. Sally, Aji, congratulations on your first full season. The show is going to go on a short break, and we're looking forward to seeing you all for the start of season 2.
Yeah, excited to keep doing this.
See you there, everybody.